Michael Wendroff. How are you, man?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with the creative community.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let me give the audience a brief introduction here for you so they get a little bit of understanding of who you are before we dive into the conversation.
Sounds good.
You earned a master's in business administration and marketing from New York University and was inducted into its Hall of Fame. You're a marketing consultant who has built a successful global career as a marketing consultant, merging your business and your creative expertise. Coming from a deep publishing background where your mother was an editor, stepfather was a literary agent representing major thriller authors, and lending insider insight into the writing industry. You are also an author yourself. You debuted the thriller novel What Goes Around, published by Head of Zeus, Bloomsbury Publishing, available in ebook, audiobook, and hardcover. And your paperback edition just released this month, and it is available in the US, UK, Australia, and foreign rights have been sold in multiple languages.
All true.
That's that's amazing for your first book to take off like that
I've
and
been very lucky.
have it translated into multiple languages. That's very cool.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want to go back in time to the very beginning of where were you born and what was life like as a kid for Michael?
I was born in Queens, New York, a little town called Queens Village, and life was interesting there for when I was young. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and I was living in a community that was, my father was actually a rabbi, a conservative rabbi in this community. And I think we were the only Jewish family that lived in that community. It was interesting between being the son of a rabbi and the son of a divorced parents. It was a little different for me. Basically, not a lot of the kids I grew up with really wanted to play with me very much. So I did have my best friend was a girl down the street whose mother was also not married. I don't think she
Okay.
was ever married. And then a few years later, a boy whose family came from Cuba moved in. So then I had some people to play with, but growing up it was a little
The
unusual.
scenario of potential ostracization because your father was a rabbi?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Being the
gotcha.
only Jewish person in that basically that whole community. Yeah.
Right. And did that translate into elementary school as well?
I went to a Jewish elementary school.
Okay.
It was outside my neighborhood, of course, a little
Yeah.
further away, but I had friends there, although that wasn't particularly easy either because the Jewish elementary school I went to was pretty religious, and my family, even coming from as the son of a rabbi, he was a conservative rabbi, and the school I went to was more religious than that.
Okay.
That was a little tough too, and all the other kids didn't live anywhere close by, and of course we had no car in our family, so all sorts of tiny little obstacles, but it all
Right.
ended up being just fine.
Did you find yourself walking to school or how did you get to school?
No, there was a bus that I would take to
Bus.
school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. The school had a bus. All right. How about grandparents? Were your grandparents involved in your early life very much?
No, they weren't. They were older, and I lived in Queens. They were in a care facility actually that was in Brooklyn, so they were not involved. And the same deal on my mother's side. She she hadn't been close to her family at all, so I didn't know my grandparents, though I've heard the stories of my great grandparents. My great grandfather, actually, on my mother's side, was recruited by Thomas Edison
Oh,
to
wow.
from the University of Copenhagen. He's
Okay.
Danish. So he was recruited from there and he came and he worked at his labs in New Jersey at the Edison Labs.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, he actually went on to get a number of patents himself besides what he did with Edison. And in fact, he owns a patent on plastic buttons. And he became known in New Jersey as the Button King because he made some money off of that, although his son gambled it all away. But I proudly wear buttons whenever I can on, or
Yeah.
button-down shirts, I should say.
That's fantastic. I find that very amazing. I love fashion. So buttons are definitely a thing that you pay attention to. Very cool. Very cool. So with that, from that perspective of him having that patent, did he basically own all the rights across all the industries, every company that made buttons at that point?
Yeah, he made a lot of money on it, and he was always in the society pages. You can find him in the New Jersey newspapers in the back historical editions of microfiche and all that he used to have. And so yeah, my mother grew up her first few years in a mansion in New Jersey, but then, as I say, her father was into gambling, and that
Mm,
was the end of that pretty much.
okay. Yeah, I get what your drift is. Was there a documentary done on your grandfather at all?
No, but that's a cool idea.
Yeah, definitely a cool idea. I
We could do a
seen.
double feature with the with my book, What Goes Around.
There you go. There you go. And just weave it together.
Right.
Weave it together. I remember seeing some kind of documentary on somebody who was creating buttons, and I was
Hmm,
just curious if that might have been him. What's at that point?
I don't believe so. I'll have to check into that.
As you were still young, did your mother always work in publishing?
Yeah, my mother was a little bit ahead of her time as a businesswoman. She left when I was 5. She wanted to go back to work in the city. So she moved into Manhattan and she got a job in publishing and she kind of worked her way up and she was an editor at a number of publishing houses in New York. I think the one I liked best was the one that also published Archie comics. So I got my free
Okay.
supply of Archie comics back in the day with
Nice.
who was it, Betty and Veronica? Hard to choose between those two.
Yeah.
I remember that. And I still remember my mother and seeing her on a weekend when she was home with us. And she'd be sitting cross legged on her couch with manuscript pages strewn about her. And she'd had her red pen in hand and she'd be marking up those pages with all of her editorial comments. And I guess it should have prepared me for when I got my editor's comments. Now,
Right.
those weren't in red pen, but I'd say the words in the margins of the Word document, they felt like they were in red pen. But I guess I was somewhat prepared seeing my mother go through all that growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine. I imagine.
She did quite well in the editorial houses, and then she eventually became president of a small company called Belmont Books. So she did well, and then she actually remarried, and she remarried a literary agent. Now, literary agents, as you may know, they're really the key to getting your book published. Publishers these days will not look at a manuscript directly from an author. They really need it needs to go through an agent who the middleman makes sure that the stuff is good enough for a publisher to spend their time on. And agents do a lot of things. So an agent actually could be your first editor. So often there are agents that will say, before I submit this to the publishers I know, you need to make certain changes. So you would do those first. And then the agents, they really know who, for your genre of book, in my case, what goes around is a thriller, they know who would be the best publishing firms to bring that to, and they would know which editors at the different publishing firms would be best for your type of book. So they have those connections, as the old three martini lunch stories and stuff
Right.
like that. And then if you get lucky enough to get a sale, what they'll do is they'll negotiate the price on the book and they'll go through the contracts with you and make sure everything in the contract looks okay. And they're the ones actually that will sell the foreign language rights. You mentioned mine, which I was lucky that besides the English editions, my book has been sold in Italian, which is nice because I summer in Italy now,
Okay.
in Japanese, and for some reason in Hungarian, but I'm very thankful for
Right.
that. And so agents are key. And I think it's almost more difficult for a would-be author to get a literary agent than it is for once you have an agent to get your books published. So the key is
Wow.
really getting that agent, and to get one is tough. You got to do a lot of research on who are the agents out there and how do you find the ones that are best for your novel. Then you got to write what's called a query letter to them, which is basically talking about your story and what's unique about it, as well as, who you are and what might qualify you. So it's key. So my mother did then marry a literary agent, and his clients were mostly thriller and mystery writers. Since I was able to get all those books for free, I got into those books since they were his clients' books. And I got to know what makes for a good thriller, what makes good for a good mystery, what'll keep the readers churning those pages. So I got to know them, and then I actually got to know a bunch of authors that were his clients. In fact, one, Robert Ludlum, who your listeners may know from the Born Identity movies with Matt Damon. He was a best-selling author. And I remember one time we were actually vacationing over at his winter home, which was in the Caribbean in St. Thomas. And I remember I was young, and I remember creeping up to the living room where he was sitting on a couch, and he had these yellow legal pads and his number two pencil out, and he was writing away. And that is how he wrote his 450-page thrillers by hand.
Wow.
Man, I admire Ludlum's poetry and his prose, but thank God when it came time to write What Goes Around, I had a PC.
Oh man. With that experience as a child, were you an only child or did you have some siblings at all?
I have a older sister and a younger brother.
Okay. And how was that for you in terms of travel and having them around as well? Were you guys fairly close and stayed together, or was there the
Well,
typical first child, second child, third child scenarios going on in terms of personality?
it was a little different because a few years after the divorce, we had all been actually living with my father, the three of us, as
Okay.
my mother went off to pursue her business career.
Yeah.
And after a few years of that, and when my mother was getting remarried, my siblings decided that they were going to go and live with my mother. And
Okay.
I decided I was going to stay with my father because at that point I was perfectly happy. So we actually didn't really grow up together that much
Gotcha.
because of that separation. Yeah.
All right. All right. Were either of your siblings creative as well?
Not to that degree. No, my brother became a school teacher, and my sister, she got a law degree and she did some accounting, but no one really pursued anything in the creative
Creative.
field so much. And for me, I started in business, but in marketing, which is more has more of that creative aspect to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd always liked books. I always actually wanted to be a writer. I always was good at writing, but that was more like school writing and then business writing. Although when I was working in marketing originally, then ad agencies would come to you and they would present their ads. And of course, we'd always critique them. And I would always love rewriting the ads myself, which, of course, I'm sure they hated. I'm sure they didn't buy any of my books. But the marketing thing, that's when you mentioned I went to NYU. So that's where I studied marketing. And in fact, that's where I wrote my thesis, which was on, for my MBA degree, which was on marketing in the publishing industry. So that's where I actually married my two loves of books and my new love of marketing. And it was very interesting writing this because a magazine, which is the trade journal of the publishing industry, which is called Publishers Weekly, they got wind that I was interviewing these execs in the publishing firms. and we talked about it, and they started to see what I was writing, and they actually ended up excerpting in three of their editions from my MBA thesis, and they paid me
Oh,
for it. So I actually got paid for
nice.
writing my MBA thesis. First time I got paid for writing, and I like that.
Oh, for sure.
The other
I
thing I liked though was there was this one time while I was researching it, and I was in the office of Michael Korda, who was then the editor-in-chief at Simon and Schuster. And I remember it was the time had long passed when we were supposed to have had our discussion. And finally, the door opens up to his office, and he ushers me over. And he says, "Come here. There's someone here I want you to meet." And who was it? But it was Truman Capote. Talk about thrillers, In Cold Blood, like a
Oh, wow.
masterpiece thriller. And he looked just as you'd expect with the big white suit and hat and pink shirt and all of that. It
Yeah,
was pretty wild, but it was fun for sure.
nice. If we back up a little bit
Sure.
into middle school and high school, did you still go to the same Jewish school or did you transition at that point in time?
Yeah, no, I went to a Jewish school as well for
Okay.
high school. I only went to high school for 3 years because I went to NYU under what they call early admissions.
Oh,
I was
cool.
happy to get out of that very regimented type of school and all of a
Yes.
sudden have all this free time. It was amazing because when you're in a Jewish school, yeshiva, high school, you're learning both all of the normal English subjects everyone learns, but you're also learning all of these different Hebrew studies and Bible studies and all this stuff. Our days would start at 7:30 in the morning
Yeah.
and they would end at about 6:15 in the evening. So very long days, and Sundays we had to go, but only half a day. So go
Oh, man.
go study half a day Sunday and then go off. And I was on the track team back then and go practice with the track team or do a track meet.
Okay.
So they were, yeah, those were busy times, but lots of studying. I think one benefit of being a bit ostracized growing up was that I did get to spend a lot of time studying. So I
Okay.
think that helped me get my good grades that I've had throughout the
Right.
schooling process.
And get out early. I get it. From fourth grade on, I went to a private Christian school and it was pretty regimented as well. The most excitement I had there was playing sports. Otherwise, it wasn't very fun at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah.
The friends that I made there too, I still know a lot of them till to this day. So that was a good part. But
That's good. Yeah.
everything else, nah, wasn't so much. Did you really excel in track?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm not a tall guy. I'm like 5'7", but I don't think I ever lost in the long jump to
Oh
anyone.
wow,
And we were going against Catholic schools, public schools, so we were going against some pretty tall high school kids.
right,
But yeah, I never lost, and I was pretty fast. I was a sprinter, so I did a bunch of relays and the 100-yard
okay,
dash and that. But yeah, I also did in the fall run cross country, so I enjoyed that. And once I get into something, I get pretty regimented and try
locked
and be
in.
my best at it. Doing all the exercises in high school on the track team and every day, and running further and further whenever I could, and recess at school and all of that. So I enjoyed it. I haven't done much running lately. I ran the New York City Marathon years
Cool,
ago, which was cool. It was really great. When going from borough to borough, I had such a smile across my face because it was just fun with all the spectators cheering you on and bands
right,
playing here and there. I do remember though when we hit the Bronx, which was at about mile 23 or so. There, the crowds were pretty sparse. That was the toughest part. But then head back into Manhattan, and when you get into Central Park, you definitely get that second wind. And I had that smile even as I crossed the finish line. It was cool.
yeah, nice. I noticed you got some baseballs on the wall there behind you.
Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
you really into baseball as a kid growing up?
Yeah. It was interesting. I wasn't that into sports until I was around 10 or so. And I think I remember coming back from summer camp every day, and the driver had the Mets games on the radio.
Okay.
And I started to get into it that way. And then my father was happy with that because he was actually a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And when the Brooklyn Dodgers left, he stayed with the National League and became a Met fan. So that
Yeah.
became a thing we got to do together, he'd take me to the ball games and all of that. He was an interesting guy because when he grew up, he'd also play in the Sandlots baseball in Brooklyn. And he was a really good lefty pitcher, actually.
Nice.
And the Brooklyn Dodgers had scouts out there on the Sandlot fields, and
Yeah.
they tried to recruit him to go into the minor leagues and be a pitcher for them. But of course, given his father who was a rabbi and he was becoming a rabbi, that was out of the question.
Oh
But
man.
he kept his love of baseball, and then that eventually became something we were able to do together. And then when the Mets finally won a World Series, it was great. But I still
Yeah.
enjoyed it, and throughout all the years, it is tougher than my wife's got it a little easier. She's a Yankees fan, born in the Bronx, but being a Mets fan builds character.
For
uh,
sure.
but yeah, so I got the baseballs, and in fact, when I was in marketing advertising, one of the brands that I had worked on was called Just for Men. It's a hair color for men.
Yep.
And we, in our advertising for that business, we used the ex-Met, Keith Hernandez, a very good first baseman, as well as we used a great basketball player, Walt Clyde Frazier.
Oh
So I
yeah.
got to know them, and the brand Just for Men also became a sponsor of the Mets. Got to go. I was lucky, got to go to all of these different Mets events and meet more players and get balls autographed.
Nice. Very
Yeah.
cool. I grew up with a cousin who played pro ball.
Wow.
Clyde Wright. He was a pitcher as well.
Clyde
Um,
Wright?
yep.
Oh, I remember that name. Yeah.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Who did he pitch for? Was it
He pitched
Texas or
for
Minnesota or who
I
was?
pitched for Texas for a while, California Angels for a while,
Yep.
Milwaukee Brewers for a
Hmm.
while.
That's so
Um,
cool. Yeah, I remember that name.
yeah, pitched a no hitter one time, so he's on that
Wow.
list.
Wow. Wow.
And whenever he would come to Detroit, he'd always have tickets waiting for us at Tiger Stadium. We'd be able
Nice.
to go down there.
Did you ever
And
play
then,
catch with him?
not so much. We got to sit behind the dugout, so he would
All
converse
right.
with my dad every time he would come off the field, but
That's great.
didn't get to interact with him more than that usually.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
got to see him as they were coming out of the locker rooms, stuff like that before you get back on the bus. And then his son, Jarrett, ended up playing. He played
Right.
for Cleveland and
Right.
then for
Right.
Atlanta, pitcher as well. So got to
Right.
see him later on as I was getting into high school and stuff. So
It's amazing how these last 20 years or so, it's not unusual to have the father-son athletes. And I
yeah,
think back in the day, that wasn't so much the case.
no,
I don't know why. Maybe they're getting better training or whatever, but you see a lot of that.
yeah, yeah. As you're going through high school
Uh-huh.
and you're starting to find this creative outlet for writing and you're starting to enjoy it a little bit, are you thinking that is going to be potentially the case, or are you strictly focused on, I think I want to go into marketing when I go off to college?
When I was in high school, I'd say I was looking more towards doing that career in business. I wanted to make money, and I knew that as a writer, that's a real long shot. So it was really the business. Although when I was in college, I certainly was open to the idea of maybe working in marketing in the publishing industry. That would have definitely interested me.
Yeah, yeah. I can, yeah, I can see that for sure. Did you, once you got into high school, did you still have that little bit of a disconnect with people and friendships and different things like that still going on for you?
I think because I was on a team at that point, it was the track team. I think I got to have some good buds and
Okay.
weekends we'd still, even in high school, you'd go over to someone's house for the weekend or the night or whatever. I think I had a good number of friends. Because I was in the type of school I was in, not a lot of girlfriends, unfortunately.
Okay.
That was part of the freedom of once I went to NYU.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. And how was that for you once you stepped onto the campus and realized this is a completely different environment than what I just came out of.
Yeah, it was amazing. So much free time. You take a couple of classes a day. You can sleep late. Don't go to school on Fridays or Sundays.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it was like free at last. Now, that was great. And it was still a little different, I guess, because when I started, because I skipped my senior year and stuff,
Yeah,
I was 16 years old when I started NYU. So I was certainly one of the younger ones there, but I was able to make friends and then girlfriends. But I just loved it. I loved the classes I was taking, and mostly the freedom and going to school in New York City. You've got the whole city around you and all that the city has to offer. And the school was in Greenwich Village, which is a part of New York City that is just it's different. It's just very relaxed and
yeah.
younger and a lot of music and all of that. So it was a great change for me and it was a great environment.
Being that young, did you have to work to go to school, or were you able to go based off of maybe scholarship or help from your father and mother?
I didn't have to work, although though I did. I actually was recruited for by NYU, not from a sports standpoint, but from an academic standpoint. At that point, they were trying to. They've always been a really good school, but they've been trying to further up their standards
Okay.
based on the tests that I'd taken, SATs, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted me to come, and they had developed what they call a university scholars program. So they recruited me for that, and they actually ended up basically I I didn't have to pay anything for school, and I actually got a little stipend to do stuff
Oh,
that they did.
wow.
It was a great organization. It had all sorts of we'd go to plays. We actually even did a 1 week trip to Europe.
Oh,
It
wow.
was a trip, so I was just extremely lucky because it's good because certainly my father didn't, as a rabbi, he never made more than $16,000 a year. My stepfather, literary agent, certainly did okay. And actually, my parents got divorced. It's tough when you're young. I got to see two sides of the world. I got to see the poorer side and the richer side. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess that gave me an incentive to strive to do well and be on the richer side of
yeah,
the world. But I did work actually in his literary agency first for years, going with manuscripts in hand to publishers, taking the subway to their offices and dropping off manuscripts. Now everything's done electronically. But back in the
right.
day, that's how it was done. You take the author's manuscripts. So I did that at first, and then I eventually actually worked in their foreign department, trying to sell foreign language rights as well, helping out there. So I did do that while I was going to NYU, and I was fun too.
I can imagine. Holy cow. That's a fantastic journey.
Yeah.
Being that young and being recognized for your academic excellence to the point where they're like, we want you to be a part of this program that we're trying to create and develop, and we're going to pay you.
Pretty unheard of. Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And then also, too, getting to dabble into the writing universe,
Yeah.
working in the office there with your stepfather.
Yeah.
I imagine as well, since you graduated early from high school, you're graduating early from college, even at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I had my MBA I think I was 21 when I had my MBA behind me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wow. That's an accomplishment. Like for real, that is a accomplishment. Especially, I imagine what might have been the stressors of what's taking place at home created that internal drive for you that you wanted to learn everything that you could, study even more, maybe even escape into books and the comics as well. And that just spurred this internal creative of trying to figure things out maybe a little bit faster. Would that
And
be?
it's yeah, and it's also interesting now that I think about it that I've I was working hard and I had some luck and I had some good situations, as we just talked. But
Yeah,
at the same time, there's the stress of feeling you got to get an A all the time. You don't want,
yeah, okay.
if you get your B plus, then you're like marked
That's
for
not good enough.
life, and you're not going to get the job you want, and
Right.
it's all going to go downhill. So there was always that continued stress, even though if I'm doing great and winning awards, it's always, I got to keep this up. I got to keep this up. There's that
Okay.
part of it too.
Yeah. And did that affect you in a way that was very intensely stressful on top of everything else?
Yeah, I think looking back, I kind of wish I had enjoyed the victories and the test scores, the this, the that were good, and just said to myself, relax.
Yeah, yeah,
And you don't have to be that great, but or that good. And yeah, it just seemed there were probably a lot of moments where I could have enjoyed the moment more. But looking back, I didn't. I was just worried about the next thing and not relishing what was right in front of me.
yeah. I get it. I totally get it. Once you're at NYU, you're in this completely different environment, not so structured, not so regimented. Did you start to experiment or experience a little bit more of New York City in the vastness of things that it offered in terms of nightclubs, music, cultural things, art, maybe, partnering, whatever, any of those
Yeah,
types?
I'd say most of all that.
Okay.
I like to go to Broadway, so we would go whether it's with a group of people or with a date to Broadway. But my mother was also heavy into the arts, the more traditional. So
Okay.
her husband was not so into those. So I would often go with her to Lincoln Center to see a concert or the ballet or the opera even because I knew I'd get a really nice dinner at a restaurant with her, and she
Bonus.
enjoyed it
Yeah.
too. I enjoy my tastes run the gamut in terms of music and so forth.
Yeah.
So yeah, that helped me enjoy all that the city had to offer for sure. And then being in the village, Greenwich Village, there were a lot of like local music clubs that you can go to and or
Yeah.
bars and enjoy that too. That's the positive. I always wondered if I missed something by not being in a college that's the more typical with the big green campus and leafy
Yeah. Yeah.
trees and all of that. I'm sure that would have been very nice. But it's a whole different thing when you go to a school like NYU in the middle of the city. The city is your campus. But I think I got to take advantage of it to the most that I could have.
Nice. Yeah. That, again, that opportunity with your mom being able to go to these different events and different things like that, it throws that extra color and flavor into that creative mindset of moving forward and looking at things differently because I feel that writers have a different perspective on the way things are taking place and they're able to express that through their writing.
I'm certainly always trying to observe whether it's how people act in certain situations,
Yeah,
what's going on, the interactions. So yeah, I try and sometimes listen in a bit too much, maybe.
believe me, I do the same thing. I would prefer to just sit back in a corner and watch everybody, see what they're doing, how they're dressed, how they're
Right.
interacting.
Yeah.
I'd much rather just sit back and be quiet versus having to speak and talk, engage. I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, you have a podcast.
Yes, and yet I have a podcast, which ironically, if you would have asked me if I would think about doing a podcast 2 years ago, it'd have been hell no from the beginning. No way. And then here I am, 10 months later,
You
because
never
I
know.
literally started in the 29th of December of last year, so I've only been doing it for 10 months here.
You're right.
With working with your stepfather, the little bit that you did, or at least in his offices and that kind of
Right.
thing. Once you finished school, Was it a natural transition to just continue in that, or at that point where you're like, I think I want to look at another company, other opportunities outside of that world?
At that point in time, when I was graduating, I'd written this thesis on marketing in the publishing industry, and I spoke to some people at publishing firms about coming to work there. And they're like, man, we don't really even have what you do. We don't do that kind of marketing. And they didn't even have a director of marketing. There was one company, I think it was Harper and Row at the time, who did have a director of marketing. And I spoke to this guy. He said, man, the only job we have for you would be my job, but I'm not giving that up.
Giving it up.
I actually did get a offer from Random House, but the money in the publishing industry is very little because so many people would want to work there for what they might perceive as the glamour of being in an industry like that. And there may be family money in there, so they don't need to make so much money, perhaps. I don't know. But so I would have liked to have worked in publishing, but I was also interviewing for jobs, more traditional marketing jobs in what's known as consumer product management, as well as advertising agencies. So I was pursuing the three, and it worked out for me where I got a job with a company called Playtex. And at that point, they were in Connecticut, and they were a good place to get grounded in a lot of practical marketing skills, really on the
Yeah.
job training for sure there. And I stayed there for many years. But yeah, they were a traditional marketer, of regular consumer products, and made my way up there from you start out in that in a position like an assistant brand manager, and you
Mhm.
just move up from there if you make it.
And once you got into that position, did you go ahead and move into Connecticut or did you still stay in New York?
So I stayed in New York for about a year or so, and then I did move up closer to into Connecticut, closer to the company. Yeah.
Okay. And how was that shift from concrete jungle, so to speak, to Connecticut being a little bit more furry and green and
It was,
lush?
yeah, at that point, I would say it was refreshing. The city is always so hustle and bustle, and at
Yeah.
that point in New York City's life, you're always looking over your shoulder, see what's going, watch out where you are. And then all of
Yeah.
a sudden, you get to move to Connecticut and you get to take a deep breath and enjoy all the greenery around you. So for me, it was quite a nice change. I did enjoy that. Now, of course, the work was very hard. The head of the company at that point liked to pride himself on saying, "Yeah, we play hardball here." And if you're an assistant, a new employee assistant in marketing at those jobs, you're expected to be in by no later than 8, and you probably wouldn't be leaving before 7 or 8 at night. And during the planning time of the year, which would be like 3 months, and you can easily be there till 3 in the morning. It
Oh,
was
wow.
crazy starting. It's a good thing I had that background from the yeshiva in high school, so
Right.
I hadn't forgotten the hard work while I was at NYU. But yeah, once you start out in marketing, those first couple of years are pretty crazy. It's kind of people in finance too. Those investment bankers early on, it's like nuts. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of professions are probably like that.
What was the first product that you got to work on that you felt was very intriguing for you and very fascinating to where you realized how much you may have enjoyed the marketing, maybe a little bit more than the publishing component at that point?
Well, I'll answer your question, but I'll first say that the first business I was put on was called Playtex Baby Nurser, which was this baby bottles and bibs and all of this thing. It was weird because I didn't have any
For sure.
kids. I was
Yeah.
basically a baby myself at that time. But you learn in marketing because I've worked on feminine hygiene brands too.
Okay.
And yeah, what do I know about that? I can't use that product. But learn that marketing is marketing. You got to figure out what the consumer wants, and you got to figure out the best way to fulfill that and the best way to make people aware for your product. So it almost doesn't matter. But I think early on, one of my most fun experiences was working on a new brand of shampoos and conditioners at the time, actually. It had come out
Okay.
of a salon. It was called Germac. And there was an
Yeah, I remember.
actress called Victoria Principal who'd been on the
Yeah.
show Dallas, who
Yeah.
she was advertising it, going on the TV shoots and seeing her and interacting with her. That was fun. So then I said, yeah, you could have fun. It's a lot of hard work, but there's
Yeah.
certainly fun aspects to it. And I think just marketing in general, it could be fun because you're solving puzzles and trying to figure out, doing a lot of consumer research, trying to figure out what really does the consumer want? What's the unmet need? What would make your product different and stand out and all of that. I like trying to figure those things out. I've worked on for so many years and into consulting on so many different products, but it's always the puzzle that makes it interesting and fun.
Yeah. I can, I imagine as well too. I imagine starting out on working on products that are absolutely not in your wheelhouse personally as from a consumer standpoint. It creates a scenario where you absolutely have to start thinking in a different way about that individual product, just
Yeah.
automatic.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's true. And I tell you though, that's sitting behind that one-way mirror in those focus groups. It's quite interesting hearing what you'll hear, and it
Right.
makes for quite interesting cocktail party conversation. Yeah.
I guess so. I guess so. Holy cow. Yeah, that would definitely be. Fortunately, it was behind the one-way mirror. Oh man, man. As you're there and you're getting into it, did it take you very long to be able to move up the ladder, or did you find that you were going to have to maybe pivot and shift outside of that company to somewhere else to be able to move up?
I actually spent many years at that company, like 15 years. So,
Oh
you
wow,
know,
okay.
your first move from assistant brand manager to an associate brand manager, that should be done in around a year and a half to 2 years. And then each move thereafter would usually be probably a couple of years. That's why I stayed all those years because I was moving up and getting
Okay.
experiences with other brands and
Yeah.
that was fine. And I tend to be a loyal person, so that's why I stayed there all of those years. And then I stayed like another almost 15 at the next company I went to before going into my own consulting business. So I tend to be loyal if things are good and working out okay.
For sure. Hearing you say that, it takes me back to that decision that you had to make when your siblings decided they were going to go and live with your mom. You stayed with your dad to for
Oh, loyalty. Yeah, because there was no negatives in that I perceived in the situation I was in. He's a
right.
very loving father. We'd play catch with his lefty fastball and so forth. The cooking wasn't there, but we got by. A lot
Yeah,
of TV dinners.
yeah. And two, during that time, because I remember the TV dinners, and they weren't all that bad, and the presentation of them was always like, okay, this is interesting. Everything's got its own little place. I can just eat
Exactly.
it, go around in the circle of the tray.
You got it.
Yeah. Once you got towards the end of that 15-year period, and you're starting to, I imagine, have these interests in maybe doing something more, doing something different. What was that mindset in shifting into another realm at that point?
At that point, through that company, I'd been in a lot of different positions, worked on all the different brands at that point. And so it was getting a little same old.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
did want to try something different. And in my industry, to be there that many years was highly unusual. Advertising, marketing, people are
yeah,
constantly moving around. So I was saying to myself, geez, I've been here so long. If I stay much longer, I'll never be looked on as ripe for another good,
right, right.
challenging position. So at that point, I did move on. I wanted to try a small company and a privately held company. So
Okay,
I went to a company called Combe, Combe, And they also have a bunch of different consumer products. And in fact, that's just for men that I mentioned before. The men's hair color was one of their
Okay.
products.
Got
But I
you.
went there and it was like such a family oriented company. At that point, I also had little kids. And
Uh,
they said when I was interviewing, they said, your number one priority is not going to be this company. Your number one priority has to be your family. And then the company we expect you to do, work hard and do a good job for, but that's your number two priority. So I was a little shocked by that. It was a completely different way of thinking than my prior company. And so that gave me a really good feeling for them. And it was at that point, it was the guy who was in charge was the one who founded it years before. He was an older man at that point, but his son was working in the company and taking over as
yeah.
well. It looked like it would be staying in the same family and staying with the same values that they had. Once I heard that with my little kids, I wanted to make sure I had time for them first and be able to go to all of their sporting events, games.
Yeah. Yeah.
That weighed heavily in my decision to move to them. And I was very happy with them. As I said, I stayed another 15 years.
15 years. Exactly. As you're saying, you've got little kids at this point. Let's roll back just a little bit
Sure.
to where and how you meet your wife. Was that potentially something that came out of college, or was that from working in that environment?
It was actually a third time's a charm because
Okay.
she and I, we both went to NYU undergraduate. We were both in business school there, although I didn't know her. I'd seen her across the way as there's an attractive
Yeah.
lady, but we were in different circles. And then we both ended up going to NYU for our MBAs. She was actually about 6 months behind me, but we didn't know each other there either. Just again
Okay.
saw her. And then when I was working at Playtex 6 months in, she came along to interview at the company
Oh, wow.
and have people also interview with people that are at the same level so that they would get to know about what the job is really. And so hearing it from me about what's involved. But of course, since I was very interested in her, I told her, here's what this person's going to be like. Here's what they're going to ask you. Here's the way you should answer at this type of company. So gave her the whole down low
Yeah. Yeah.
and she got the job. And so then after that, we became friendly and eventually married.
Nice. That's a very cool story. Very cool story. Yeah. Third time was a charm for sure. And also, too, the fact that you're helping her in the process of getting the job. You're like, here's the skinny on all of the ins and
Exactly.
outs of what's about to happen moving forward. That's very
Exactly.
cool. Very cool. From that perspective of being in marketing, being able to take a product and help get it to market, all of that creative juice and that flow that's in play, what was the one thing that most excited you about the things that you were working on and doing? What part of that process?
I think certainly the advertising part of that process. So
Okay.
you're working with advertising agencies to come up with the ads and then going on the shoots. You'd have, as a marketing person, you'd be there with the agency people to supervise them and there's always little questions that come up on the product that have to be answered. And just getting to know the actors and the actresses and even before that, doing the casting, being involved in saying, well, here's what we're looking for, and then seeing the actors and actresses, reading the roles and making decisions on them. And then the wardrobing and it's all like mini movie productions. It is.
That's what I was just thinking of.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it's amazing how long the thing will take. We could shoot a 15-second commercial and it could take 2 or 3 days to shoot that. There's a lot of downtime, there's a lot of waiting. There's the boring side to it, but overall, it's a fun thing being able to go there and see the ads that you work with the agencies on in concept form, see them come to life. And of course, so much better when they sell your product.
For sure, for sure. And from that perspective too, working with the talent that is going to be brought in and come in, a lot of times, as you mentioned, you've had some pretty high profile people that you've worked with.
Yeah.
How did that experience change the perspective on the way you viewed those people at that point in time, knowing that they're having to apply, quote unquote,
Mhm.
have this opportunity?
I think both with regular actors as well as the celebrity actors and actresses, what you learn is they're all just people. We were lucky with the celebrities that we hired because they were really nice and they were just trying to do the best possible job they could. And that was
Yeah,
true of the regular actors too. You can see how they're wanting to fully understand the concept of the ad and how the different ways they might be able to play the role and what might work out best, and then see them interact with the directors. But at the end of the day, they're people just trying to get their job done.
yeah. They just get paid a little higher sometimes, depending
Exactly.
on who they are. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I think that's a very interesting perspective that a lot of people in the creative world don't necessarily get to hear or get to realize that just about everybody that's in a creative role or in a creative career ultimately is just another person just trying to get the next paycheck thing or
Yeah,
get the next gig. And it's not like they're beyond touchable, so to speak, which is what a lot of the normal perception is with celebrity. And I think for me, from my experience, being able to go and see my cousin play ball at a
right,
younger kid, I lost that starstruck scenario early
right, right.
and being able to see that, oh, wait, he's talking to us as he's going in the dugout. And then we're seeing him come out of the locker room, and he's just the normal person at that point. He
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
have on the uniform anymore.
yeah,
He's just in regular
yeah,
clothes.
yeah. I tell you, it's crazy for me because with my book, I've done a lot of book signings. I've done a lot of talks, whether in book clubs or big events. And then, so these people then coming over to me wanting my autograph, it's like, what the hell? Why would you want my autograph? It's not just,
Yeah,
I'm Michael. I wrote a book. What's the big deal? But it's so
yeah,
funny when they ask for your autograph. It's okay.
yeah. It is different. It is different. I think the ultimately the panache of getting the autograph with the book, I think that's that keepsake moment type
Mm-hmm.
scenario.
Yeah, I
Uh,
guess so. Yeah.
yeah. Once you're getting towards the end of that 15-year second career,
Yep.
15-year second career,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
and you're thinking about, all right, I think I may be at the end of the road in this
Uh-huh.
company.
Uh-huh.
How did you decide to pivot again?
I was lucky because the last few years in the end of the second company, I was doing something a little different. So I was learning and doing something unique from what I'd done previously. And what that difference was is I was starting to work globally. So I was starting to, we would have country managers in different countries, or we
Okay.
had countries where we were just exploring it. So I'd either meet with a country manager and talk about, learn from them as well as give them insights into what might work for their country based on what happened in similar countries, or go explore India or China to see if it makes sense for us to bring our products into that. So I got to go basically all over the world for a few years, and at the same time, obviously, I'm learning about the different countries and how different things are valued and so forth. So I did really enjoy that part. And then there came a period of time I said, okay, that's cool. I learned that. Maybe I could become my run a business myself and be a global marketing expert based on what I'd picked up both in the US over all these years and in the
Yeah.
last prior years in other countries. So that's when I decided to go on it on my own, which was a good decision.
Okay. And once you start traveling around the world, also having a family as well, how did that time abroad affect you in terms of when you got back? Was it a scenario of, oh man, or I can't wait to get back home? Or was it a scenario of, I know I've got to do this, my family understands it, and that you just keep moving along that way.
The timing for that really worked out well because at that point, the kids were getting older, either finishing high school or beyond. And so it became an easier time for me to be able to be away. And they all also understood what was going on and that that this was part of the job. And they had all of their friends groups at that point. But they got a kick out of it. They call me Mr. Global, and
Nice.
they
Okay.
liked hearing about the different countries and so forth. I think the timing was just right.
Gotcha. And were there any of those opportunities allowing for you to maybe take them with you? Maybe what you experienced when your mom would take you guys abroad early on as kids?
Yeah, good point. Actually, my son got to spend his 16th birthday walking in the Great Wall of China, and he got
Oh,
to
wow.
come along on that trip, which was
Cool.
good. He'd also gone, and my wife, and they'd also gone on a trip with me to London, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, to the Netherlands too. Yeah, we actually did a little bit of being able to take advantage of that as a family. So that was a good benefit as well. And a lot of these countries are countries that I went to and them that we probably would not have gone to if not for business.
Otherwise,
So,
yeah.
so that turned out to be a real plus.
Cool. And did you have, uh, with realizing in those times that you're doing something with your family that you were able to do early on with your mom and stepfather and those types of situations, were you able to reminisce a little bit about the opportunity to be able to share that experience with them and offer them that opportunity?
I think I was just grateful that I was able to do those things with them. But thinking back, yeah, I was lucky that I was put in the position where, with my mother and stepfather, I was able to experience a lot of new things that, if my mother had never gotten divorced and I'd grown up in Queens Village and
Yeah,
was it, I think the experiences certainly would have been lesser.
yeah,
And I don't think I would have become whatever I became.
yeah, yeah. I would imagine it would have been. And that's how I'm weaving the story as you're telling it, seeing
Hmm.
these different things play out and how it could have gone in this other way. But the way that it went provided a whole lot of extra flavor, extra color, different things like that, that I imagine ended up playing out in your writing
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, I think so.
As you step into doing your own business and doing the consulting on all these different new projects and whatnot, did you have the opportunity to be able to be very selective at that point of who you decided you wanted to work with? Or was it just a scenario of, here's an opportunity, I'm just getting going, I'll just take whatever's coming this way? Or were you the one going and getting them?
It was a balance. So I would say
Okay.
that I was open to any marketing opportunity where consulting was requested, meaning that I would take small jobs. But at the same time, I'd had a lot of experience in the men's hair color business, which is quite an interesting business, very psychological, actually. And I'd learned that from the global part of it, that how men feel about coloring their hair differs amazingly by country to country. And for example, in India, it's men are considered unusual if they don't color their gray hair,
Really?
versus the U.S. It's a lot tougher sell. But I actually, what I would do is because of my expertise, there aren't a lot of people that worked in men's hair color
Sure.
in the U.S. So because of that, I would reach out to other big players globally that I knew of that are in personal care goods and say that, hey, I know the US market, which is a huge market I know men in the market and I know hair color. And right now there's only one game in town, basically, which was the Just for Men brand that we had built.
Yeah.
And I said that I've got a lot of expertise. I know, what's good about the current offerings and where the weaknesses are. Would
Yeah.
you have an interest in pursuing that? And I actually did get a very large company as a client. It's called out of India. It's called Godrej. And they're actually no one's heard of them here in the US, but they're a $4 billion company because they're in all sorts of different
Wow.
industries. But they have a lot of personal care expertise. I did a consulting job with them for years.
Okay. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the psychology component of men's hair care? Because I don't think the general world and general audience would understand how that could play into something like that type of product.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because there was this whole thing years ago where it was considered only women color their hair, and if a guy wants to get rid of his gray, he might be considered effeminate. That was one of the reasons why we came up with the strategy of using professional athletes, guys, to
Yep.
promote the business. So that's how Walt Frazier and Keith Hernandez, and we had some football players, and we had pretty big stars from all over who did our advertising then to try and attack that psychological barrier. And then we did all sorts of research. We did research once where we hypnotized guys to find out what's going on in their psyches.
Yeah.
We did stuff where we'd follow them in home and watch their routines. We connected with Harvard psychiatrists, all sorts of things. And at the end of the day, we found out that there's a lot of reasons why guys might want to get rid of their gray. Certainly, a big one would be when guys get divorced. And that would happen often when they're in their early 40s, I'd say, and they're starting to gray and they're back in the dating scene and they don't necessarily want to go out with someone their age. They prefer a younger lady. So that would be a motivating factor to color their hair. Then we would also learn that there are aspects of business that would be a psychological factor involved. And guys who are gray in business might not be looked on as energetic as the younger guys that they're competing with in business. And
Right.
they may not be seen as up to date on what's going on in the world if they got a head full of gray hair. So, how you're perceived in business and, being in the rat race and wanting to keep your job and keep on getting promoted, that became a psychological motivating factor. And we also saw that family became a factor too, in that your daughters, you don't want to look like a grandfather to your daughter, or you don't
Yeah.
want them to be concerned that you're aging and you're not going to be around for them. That was a very deep psychological thing we found about the concerns of little kids and
Interesting.
losing a parent and all of that. Different reasons for different men to color their
Yeah.
hair. It wasn't that simple. And we'd have to devise a marketing strategy first to overcome the feminine thing, and then secondly, to push on those different triggers that guys might have. And
Yeah. For
there was the basic, if I look good, I feel good, and I want to feel good.
sure.
That was a part of it too.
Yeah. I find it interesting, and the reason for that is because as I was growing up, my mom was a beautician part time. So she would do people's hair out of the house and stuff like that. And in the 70s and 80s, she had a client, a gentleman who was a real estate agent. And in the 70s and 80s, you had that time period where men were getting permanents. And he would come over every couple weeks, get his hair done, get a new perm in the hair. And I always found it fascinating because I didn't see a whole lot of that outside of him just coming over and getting that done. And it was very interesting for me because he was just like you said, he felt like he looked good and it made him feel good when he walked out the door and he was always happy with it. That wasn't a normal scenario in today. During that period of time, yeah, there's a lot of guys getting their hair permed. And then as I would get older too, my mom would put highlights in my hair. So I was able to have that little bit of a edgier look out in
Right.
society because I just had an easy opportunity to get that done. So I've always looked at hair and fashion in a way that was completely different than what most people were able to see it. So it's very interesting to hear you
Yeah.
talk about being in that side of the world of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
When you're building this career up with your own marketing opportunities and consulting with these different companies and countries, in essence, when does the spark or the desire to step into writing start to bubble up within you at that point in time?
I'd always wanted to write a book my entire life. Business, kids, they all
Right.
got in the way. And then it became of an age I said, man, if I don't do this thing soon, this may never happen. And then the pandemic came, COVID-19. So that point, business had slowed down. Here in Florida, you couldn't even go to the beaches, couldn't play tennis, couldn't do anything. I was out of excuses for not trying to write that book. So that's when I said, all right, let me give this a shot. So I did.
And was the interest to step into the thriller side of things traced all the way back to your stepfather and bringing those books home to you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's where reading all of those that were there, I got to really enjoy them and got a feel for what was making the better seller ones better selling. So tried to emulate the good stuff that I'd learned from then when I finally decided to give it a shot.
Okay. Yeah. I imagine that all helped in the process of making that decision to go in a certain route.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I can see that very much. And then also too from the marketing side of stuff, you're able to look at it from that perspective. Is this going to be something that's going to work? All that kind of thing. When you decided what you were going to write on and coming up with that title, What Goes Around, what was the premise behind that in terms of the creation?
It's interesting because actually it was my publisher who came up with that title, which I thought once I heard it, yeah, originally I had it titled as Perennial. And my publisher said to me, the name's fine, but it doesn't really sound like a thriller name. Here's a bunch of other options for this name. And What Goes Around was on that list. I said, oh, that's perfect based on the key premise and twist in this book. And actually, the impetus for writing this specific book does go back to my mother. It actually
Okay.
goes back to what she said to me the second that I was born, or so I'm told. I was put on her chest. She looked deeply into my eyes and she said, oh, how nice to see you again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
So that again part always intrigued me, and I wanted to do something with it. And it certainly plays into the major twist ending in my book that's been called extremely original and cool.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So, from that perspective, hearing that, did your mother have a different thought process around spirituality in potential contrast to your father's experiences with spirituality?
My mother was always a very spiritual person. She originally wasn't Jewish. She was brought up as a Christian, and then she converted to Judaism after investigating it and actually hearing my father speak in New York City at some different things that she went to before she knew him. And then all her life, she was always experimenting with different types of spirituality, different
Yeah.
religions, different this, different that. She felt that she knew me from a past life. And do I believe in reincarnation? I'm not sure, but I'd like to keep an open mind. It would be nice to think that people you've loved and maybe lost, that you might be with them again in life, would be
Yeah.
hopeful, interesting. She clearly believed it, and I'm willing to say maybe, and it makes a
Right.
good book.
For sure. It's definitely a subject matter that people, if they can comprehend a little bit of it, it makes for interesting thoughts as well.
Yeah, and it's not like the whole book's about that. It is a thriller. It is a real page turner. And it does involve these mysterious shootings going on in a small town. And these two detectives are paired up to find out what's going on. One big guy, like a Jack Reacher type, and the other
Okay.
a beautiful, brainy woman. And they hate each other at first based on things that happen at police academy together, but their relationship does evolve, and the journey to find out what's going on does take them into these contemporary worlds of some of these hate groups like incels and boogaloo
Ah,
boys and
okay.
supremacists. So a lot of
Yeah.
the reviewers said that I managed to make a real page-turning thriller, but also touch on some difficult contemporary issues in society today.
Nice. The other thing that I'm finding interesting about the possibility of the way that you're thinking is the fact that you worked with a company in a country known as India, and their spiritual thought process is that cycle does take place.
You're exactly right. The Hindu religion does not, actually, there are a lot of religions that do believe that.
Yeah.
And there's been some studies done on that. I think it's university, is it University of Michigan, or it's a big university that has a whole department centered on researching that. There's a professor, Ian Stevenson, who wrote some books on it, studying a bunch of cases of what they believe was reincarnation.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. So it would be cool if it is true.
Yeah. From my perspective, it's something that I feel is the case. And I don't look at it from the perspective of what most people think of reincarnation being.
Mm,
I think the standard thought process is that we're going to come back and we're going to look the same every single we look just like we are today.
mm,
That I think that's the general consensus of what reincarnation
mhm.
is. From my perspective, I look at it from the soul side of things. And from what we know of just about every religion or spiritual practice, the soul is what is the eternal thing that continues on.
Yep.
And my thought process and belief is that's what tends to come back and come back in a way to learn something that it may not have in the past. What really solidified that as a real potential possibility and solidified my own beliefs in it was I came across a psychologist, psychiatrist, I believe he is as well, Dr. Brian Weiss. He wrote a book called Many Lives, Many Masters.
Yeah, Brian Weiss, I definitely read his along while researching this book.
Yeah. And once I read that one, I dove into every single one that he had out. I just was taking them in as much as I possibly could.
Yeah.
And that for me started allowing the mind to expand out and realize, oh, this may not be the only time that I have people that are already gone. There is more of a chance that I'm probably going to get to see them again at some point in time. And I,
But when you read what goes around, you'll see that that twist ending that involves that it's really all about learning and having to go back to continue to learn and to better yourself. The book's that page-turning thriller, but at the same time, it's really about the unbreakable bonds that transcend time.
yeah, yeah, that in and of itself is some things that I would wish more people could be a little bit more open to
Mm-hmm.
possibilities of. I don't think there would be so much regard to negating familial scenarios or friendships and different things like that, or cutting them off so harshly if there was a realization of this can continue, and it probably has many times over already. Like maybe we can figure out that it doesn't have to be an abrupt stop at particular points in life with different people. It can be something that can be worked out, or some kind of amicable situation come into play with
I think
life's.
I think those are really good points. I agree with you.
Thank you. With having all this time during the pandemic and getting this thing written and then starting to get it out to an agent, What was it like for you finding an agent? Was it a lengthy process, or did it come rather quickly for you?
Now, that's the toughest part of the whole process, I think, is getting an agent. And eh, if you look at the books in your category, often you'll look at the acknowledgments in the back of the book and you'll see the writers will acknowledge who their agent is. So that's one way to get names of agents and agencies, which is something I did. And there's also directories you could look at online or even in the library that have information about different agents. But what's key to send to the kind of agent that's interested in your category. So you don't want to send a thriller to agents that represent romances, that kind of thing, because you'll get nowhere. But yeah, it would not be unusual for a author to send out 50 to 100 query letters. So letters asking agents if they're interested based on what you tell them. And every agent's a little different, and some will want to see an outline of your story. Some will want to see the first 3 chapters of the book to check out your writing, that type of thing. But that's the hardest part when it comes to writing itself. That's for me, there's different kind of writers. And for me, I love writing. This is the most fun I've ever had. And but it's a process. You learn it's a process. And for me, I'm into plotting and outlining everything. I need to know what the big twist ending is going to be. I need to know what the twists along the way are going to be. I need to know where I'm going to plant the red herrings to misdirect the readers. So I need to know all of that. And not everyone writes like that. Not everyone's a plotter. There are some people that they're called pantsers because they'll sit down by the seat of their pants, get on their PC, and start typing away with no clue what's going to happen in the story. It just somehow happens. And there's no right way or wrong way. You get bestsellers out of both ways of writing. But I need to plot in pretty decent detail what's going to happen before I could start to write. And it's not like my story, my novel won't change along the way. It could evolve. There was one time where, my plot called for one of the characters to be killed. And I came to really like this character. These characters talk to you and you start to get good relations with
Yeah.
these characters. Am I crazy? Maybe a little, but there's this character I really liked and I just couldn't kill him off. So I had to change the plot of the book. But in fact, there was this other character who was a very similar thing. I'd come to have this really like this character, my
Yeah.
best friend, and I had to kill him off. And this time I actually did. And my wife's yelling at me the whole next week, why are you in such a depression? He's not real. He's not real. To authors, these characters are real. They really are. The writing process, for me at least, is first do the detailed outline.
Yeah.
Second, then becomes the research because in what goes around, I'm dealing with guns, I'm dealing with these crazy groups, and what did I know about them? What does a yeshiva boy know about guns and so forth? So I had to do the research, and so that's a lot of googling. These days as I'm writing my second book, because my book, my what goes around did, so got such great reviews that my publisher gave me a contract for a second book. So I'm writing that now, but now there's Chat GPT, which for research I find to be very efficient. You do have to double check what they say. So much more efficient than Googling 50 sources. So
Yeah.
there's that. But what I really believe the best way to research is to actually talk to the people that do the professions that you're writing about. I'm living in a community here. I've been very lucky because I was able to talk to FBI agents, able to talk to a chief of police, able to talk to a female detective, which for my story was
Oh,
very important. So I spoke to one in the local police precinct and she was great. She gave me all these insights and anecdotes and a lot of them made it their way into the book. So it was great. Now, I don't think I spoke to any serial killers, but who knows?
right. Little breadcrumb.
So plotting and then the research and then the last aspect of all that is when I actually get to sit down and write. And for me, I like to write in the mornings when I'm fresher. And what I'll do is I'll just start scribbling away on my PC to get the story line out, get the things moving in the story. And don't worry about the writing itself. Certainly not the punctuation, the grammar, but even don't worry about the words used. And then what I'll do, so for example, day one, I just right away. Then day two, I'll come and look at it, what I wrote before. And that's when I'll try and make it into real writing. Make sure every word is the right word in that sentence and all the sentences fit well in the paragraph. And that's where I'll add the metaphors and the analogies and certain areas where I want the writing almost to sound a bit poetic. And after I do that, then I'll start the process again. So scribble out the next part of the process of the story, and that will be day in and day out the process. Get the story out, go back and rewrite it so it's real writing, get the story out, rewrite it until finally, finally, I can write my two favorite words, which are the end.
Ah, I get it. I get it. This is the information that I was very much looking forward to having the conversation with you about, was
Cool.
because I feel this process that you have in you and have worked with can be very helpful and informative to the creative community from multiple angles, in terms of whether it's in writing or even if it's in some other form of creative scenario. And the reason I say that is because of your background in marketing and the processes that you had to go through with that, with a product, with developing it out, creating the advertising, working on the marketing campaign, and then getting it to market. That process, as you're describing the way you're writing, I'm seeing is almost of a mirror scenario, so to speak. One of the things that you said that I found very interesting that I'd like to touch on just a little bit is when you had to kill off that character. You had gotten so connected to that character that after you went through that process of ending that storyline, you said your wife was asking you, "Why are you so depressed?" Which tends to lead me to believe that process of creation ultimately has a bit of a connection that becomes more than just pen to paper separation. Am
Yeah,
I on track with that?
you get, yeah, you get immersed in this world and these people become real. Yeah.
Yeah. It, I see that in my own creative experiences. If I put a lot of time into a realistic pencil drawing, by the time I get to the finish point, or at least where I think I need to stop at that point, it takes me a good 1 to 2 weeks
Mhm.
after that process to almost, in a sense, grieve that it's finished,
Oh, I see. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
because you're putting so much energy into that,
Hmm.
Italy, and
Yeah.
a lot of times things are just channeling, flowing through you,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
becomes very connected.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
once you finish it, it's, oh man, what do I do now? And of course, after that time period of realizing, "Oh, I can do this again," then you get to a point where you pick back up the pencil, pick back up the paints, come
Yeah.
up with new products,
Yeah.
whether it's jewelry. I even found it when I was designing jewelry. I would finish a piece or finish a total collection that was based around a piece,
Yeah.
and I'd be like, "Oh man," have that downturn of emotion. And then once I would start, or an idea would spring forth to start another collection, then it would just be all this back build up again. It's really exciting.
For me, with my second book, it's actually a prequel to what goes around. So I'm
Mm,
able to get back on
reconnect.
those characters that were killed off. They're still alive, so I get to be with them.
Amazing. Oh, that was a
But you know,
twist I didn't see coming.
you talk about the finality of you finish the thing and what now? But it's interesting that at least with traditional publishers like I have with Bloomsbury, I've learned that when I said my two favorite words are the end is not
Right.
the end because there are so many editing stages when you get with a traditional publisher. The first editor you're dealing with is really the one that bought your book. And that editor, I would say, is more of, I'd say, a strategic editor, structural editor. So that editor would be dealing with things like maybe this book needs a prologue, or maybe there's too much action here and should move it to here, like bigger
Okay.
issues. And then after that, so you make your changes for that. And then after that, there's what's called a line editor. And a line editor does just how it sounds. They go through every single line in your book and make sure it's as good as it can be. And then after you've made those changes, you are sent to a copy editor. And the copy editor's job is to make sure you didn't do something like say, oh, she has green eyes in chapter 2 and brown eyes in chapter 8, or make sure your facts on if you're dealing with guns or whatever you're dealing with, specialized things, make sure your facts are right. You got to go through it then. And then there's a proofreader that comes after that to try and because there's always something that's got to be fixed. It's amazing. Even today, when I pick up finished books from major publishers, there's still errors. But these proofreaders, their job is to try and catch these errors.
Yeah.
Every time I'm going with a different editor, I'm doing that work, and I think I'm finally done. And my publisher comes to me and says, okay, Michael, the hardcover typeface of what goes around has just been set. You need to read through it again to make sure nothing fell out during this process. I can't
Oh,
tell you how many times I read my book. It's a good thing I like it.
holy cow. Holy cow. With all of those iterations
Yeah.
of editors,
Yep.
is there a certain point where it can potentially be like, oh my gosh, again? I got to do this?
Yeah, no, you definitely, it does become a bit tedious
Okay.
because you've been through this even before you submit your book to an agent, let
Yeah.
alone a publisher. You've edited it yourself a number of times too. Yeah, it does to get to be a lot. And then sometimes you can have a different point of view versus your editor or any of those editors. I was lucky with mine because there'd be certain times where there'd be a disagreement and either my editor would listen to my rationale and say, okay, that makes sense. Or I would listen to his rationale and I'd say, okay, that makes sense. Because a lot of times, if there's a real reason you're doing it, or yeah, and at some point you are given some creative license, like things that normally wouldn't be right, they'll say, okay, it's a give and take, but it's a process for sure.
Yeah. Until you get that left-handed fastball like you got from your father as a kid.
Right. Exactly.
Uh, with that give and take component,
Yeah.
would you say to a creative who's potentially looking to step into this or may
Hmm.
be on their first work, would you say for them to be open, but also to still have a little bit of that confidence to stay with what your original vision is at certain points?
I guess it depends on how far along in the writing process this writer is. I think it's good if you're a writer and you could maybe have a writing group where you can bounce things off each other and get feedback. And at that stage, how much you listen to that is going to be a little bit up to you, depending on how consistent or not the feedback is. But I would say two areas of advice I think are the biggest things for would-be authors. And one is when it comes to the writing itself, there is a real craft involved in writing. And you have to learn that craft. And there's a lot of ways you can learn your craft. I took a number of, you can learn it online. I took a number of courses. I think it was BBC Maestro that was doing the ones I took one was a writing course from Lee Child, who's very successful with the Jack Reacher books. Another was from Harlan Coben, also a very successful thriller writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't always agree on everything, which is good because you could take what works for you and do your own style to some degree. But you definitely will learn a lot. There's a lot about points of view and when you're writing, whose point of view is it going to be from? There's a lot about how to keep the readers excited, how to make sure your middle of the book doesn't drag, how to do dialogue, how to do openings, how to do close. There's a lot to learn. You can also learn by going to conventions. Every genre will have its own convention. I, for example, go to Thriller Fest, which is in New York City once a year, and you get all big name writers there. And a lot of what that's about is days of seminar symposiums on different aspects of writing where you will learn as well as you make great friendships. And I found the writing community is amazingly friendly and amazingly helpful.
Oh,
That's why I was lucky. I met people there who are best-selling authors who were actually willing to read my book, then a totally unknown author,
yeah,
and they gave me these great quotes about it. Learning your craft, meeting other writers, that's very important for a would-be writer. And then the other thing I think that's important for would-be writers to realize is that these days, being an author, even traditionally published like I am, being an author is 50% writing and the other 50% is marketing. You got to go on podcasts like this great podcast. You've got to expand, get out on social media. If you have a little bit of a presence on social media right now, now's the time to try and expand that presence on social media because publishers actually look at that when they make a decision on whether they're going to publish your book. It says, is
yeah,
he going to be helpful in the process of getting the word out for this book? Getting out on social media and being ready to talk publicly at events. I definitely had an advantage in that area based on my background.
yeah,
Writers in general tend to be introverts, so that could be a very hard aspect for them.
yeah,
But for me, talking at book events, book signings, bookstores, fairs, all of that, that because of my training and background comes a little more naturally. There could be like a local writers fair and there'll be authors sitting behind a table and they're waiting for people to come up to them and I'll be standing in front of the table, reaching out and talking to them about my book. But that's what people would-be authors have to realize that you gotta get out there on social media, start laying the groundwork for that. And the more you do this kind of thing, the more comfortable you'll get at it and the more, second nature it will become. So those would be the two key pieces of advice I have for would-be authors. And actually, if there's any writer that has more questions, you can reach me on my website, michaelwendroff.com, and I have my email there. And believe me, I answer every single question I get. I enjoy helping would-be authors along.
that's amazing. Perfect. And we'll have all that information too linked in the description of
Great.
each one of the episode releases on the whatever platforms, most of everyone that we're on, anyways. That was the other thing that I was going to go to next was the component of putting this out to market. How
Mhm.
much of, based on your experience and what you've done with all these other products, how much opportunity do you have working with the publisher to help direct some of that?
Starting even a little earlier on, you're going to have a good collaborative approach with your existing publisher on what's going to get out there. For
Okay.
example, I mentioned that the publisher renamed my book and came up with a
Yeah.
great name, which ties to the basic premise of the book. And what goes around comes around. And I also love that name because it's at the start. You're generating a connection in the consumer's, in the reader's mind because see
Yeah.
what goes around and they'll finish it off. What goes around with what comes around goes around. What goes around comes around. And the publisher was also very helpful in the cover art because I was used to in my marketing career where the ad agencies would come up with the ads and they'd show you a few and you'd have to send them back with either changes or brand new ads or both. And in this case, when my publisher said we got the cover to send to show you, I said, hey, great. And I was ready to see a bunch of options and not necessarily love them. But they showed me the one cover of what goes around, and I loved it right off the bat, which was unusual for me because, first of all, it looks like a thriller with the colors. And when I put it on a bookstore shelf, and when you
Yeah.
see it on the shelf, it definitely pops off the shelf. And
Right.
there's also this circularity to the design, which totally goes with that spiritual aspect of it. Very collaborative relationship. They've done some social media marketing, but as I said, they're really depending on authors to get out there and work it too. But it's interesting because All of the publishers have been helpful. I was in Italy this summer, and my Italian publisher was getting all of these interviews where they'd put subtitles on me because it's obviously the book was in Italian.
Yeah.
And the interviews, which they would translate into Italian, and that showed up online or in magazines. Publishers can are very helpful, and it could be very collaborative. I've never had any negative on anything with them. And of course, if you self-publish, which is a very legitimate way to publish too, there's been best-selling novels that have come out of publishing, self-publishing. But then obviously it's 100% reliant on you getting
Yeah.
out there and making it work.
Yeah, for sure. It's completely different today versus 20 years ago
Hmm?
in the industry,
Yeah.
where you relied on the publisher to help put everything out there. And then
Mm.
you do the book tour, the
Right.
thing.
Right.
Now it's like you said, they want to know like what your social media looks like, how many people are following you, how many people are you connected to, what's that circle look like? Because, and that's across multiple industries, even probably more so in the music industry. They're looking at that and they're like, wait a second, you're only got 150 people that are following you. We're gonna have to do something about that.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
With the opportunities to create this prequel now,
Yeah.
and you get to re-engage with the character because now she's alive again. What does that do for you from an internal standpoint of reviving that creative juice that can come up?
It's fun. And it's fun being able to reconnect and have them have some fun before they're dead.
Yes.
And but at the same time, it's for me, it's also fun with generating new characters and new situations, and
Yeah.
that it's that whole creative process, which is that's the most difficult aspect, I think, is the plotting. Because I feel it has to be done so. The writing for me is not necessarily that difficult. And actually, the rewriting, at least the early stages, the rewriting for me is when I really have the most fun because then I can really concentrate on every word in every sentence and see if I could make it even better and I can make it better the
Yeah.
next time. There comes a point where you got to say pencils down and you got to say, all right, it's good enough. Let's go. But
Yeah.
I really do enjoy the rewriting process.
Very cool. Very cool. I want to again go back to early on in life when you didn't have a whole lot of connection in place, an opportunity to be friends with a lot of people. Has the career that you've had in marketing and now this career that you're taking on as a writer and an author, has that allowed you to evolve into a person that is able to connect a little bit easier and a little bit quicker?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. I've changed dramatically. I was an introvert. I was very shy, very quiet, didn't have a lot of friends. And every decade I've changed a bit. Some of it is forcing yourself to do it, and some of it is what's required, or you get used to certain things. And now I'd say I'm completely reversed. I'm almost more extroverted. I love to go out and meet people and talk to people.
Nice.
And
Cool.
at dinner, my wife says I got to shut up now. It's too much. A lot of it was just based on the circumstances around me, but a lot of it was definitely pushing myself to do that and become more of that type of person.
Yeah.
I've been happy with both types of people that I've been, but I'm enjoying this part of my life now a lot.
Excellent. Excellent. Michael, I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing the story that you have with the creative community. I think it's highly valuable. It's highly colorful. It's highly enriched with many different elements and aspects. And I really appreciate you taking this time and coming on today.
Thank you.
One of,
This
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say this has been very interesting and fun.
Cool, cool. I'm glad. I'm glad. One of the things that I always want to remind the audience at the end of one of these episodes is always listen to your heart, but in the same sense, be kind to your mind.
Mhm.